Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1119 brings us some great action sequences as the crew tries to escape the island, and in this breakdown, I'll be talking about the significance of Emet, the Iron Giant, what we learned about the future of the Big Mom Pirates in this chapter, who exactly has Haki, and much more. As always, if you've been enjoying my weekly manga breakdowns, be sure to like and subscribe, and with that said, let's get into Chapter 1119, Emet. This chapter starts off with the 9th entry in the Ogre Child Yamato's Golden Harvest Surrogate Pilgrimage cover story as we find Yamato walking through the region of Kibi. In the last chapter, I speculated that we may actually end up visiting Ebisu Town before coming here, but I guess we just skipped ahead to the start of Yamato's journey. We don't really know much about this region outside of its barren environment. It's a bit of a wasteland with factories erected upon these large mountainous rocks, and we have seen hills with trees elsewhere in this region as well. Kibi is also where the Yakuza boss Yatape resides, so I hope to see him soon. While Yamato was shown to be beloved by the people of the Flower Capital in the last chapter, it seems this enthusiasm does not extend to the rest of Wano, as we find Yamato being pelted with rocks by children in this cover. We've seen this kind of behavior from unruly children all throughout the series as a means to attack someone they view as an outsider or monster, most recently having seen it in Kuma's flashback. I do like this inclusion as it adds a bit more texture to the political and cultural landscape of Wano post-Kaido and Orochi's defeat, showing that Wano is not all sunshines and rainbows even after their victory, and that hatred and resentment still resides. I always found the ending of the Wano arc to be particularly interesting for this reason, as it showed that the battle may have been won, but the war against generational hatred still continued. The country had grown into a state where clans tried to eliminate one another for decades, and now we have the lasting imprint of an outsider like Kaido as well, so I'm excited to see how Yamato will work to change the hearts of the people. Now, one last thing before moving on, it seems Yamato has Yasuo's sword upon their hip now, after I had pointed out in the previous breakdown that we haven't seen it since Kinemon explained the purpose of this favor several chapters ago. So it seems that the potential plot point of someone catching up to Yamato to bring them the sword is no longer viable, but hey, that's the fun of week-to-week speculation. So with all of this covered, let's get into the chapter itself. We pick back up with the tearful exchange between Stussy and Kaku, as he tells her she better leave while she can before Lucci comes back. Recall that Lucci still planned on eliminating her after everything came to a conclusion from the day before. Kaku, however, has been shown to be a bit more empathetic towards Stussy's situation, with her having been forced to betray her friends to help Vegapunk. This is something he knows all too well, after having befriended Polly and the rest of the Galileo shipwrights, and even showed some amount of regret for being left no other choice with his work as an assassin. And it's with all of this that he tries to hold back tears when telling Stussy to leave him. On a more joyous note, we also return to the scene from the last chapter with both Luffy and Bonnie in their Nika forms. The Giants of Elbaf cheer on the appearance of the two Nikas, while the Marines surrounding the coast recognize Luffy's appearance from his wanted poster. We've actually seen some of these Giants before, with the bearded fellow in the middle seemingly being the same one that we saw in the last chapter, shooting these rather large pistols, or on closer inspection, potentially even cannons. To the right of him in the back is a helmeted giant with longer hair that may be the one that we saw in the panel beside him in the previous chapter, who was shooting an arrow. All the way to the right may be one of the giants that we saw when the giant warrior pirates first spilled onto the island. A bit later, we see some of the other giants getting caught up in the drums of Liberation rhythm and dancing around on the ship, only to be scolded by Dory and Brogy, who themselves get called out as hypocrites since they were also dancing in the previous chapter. Dory mentioned that it was a festival rhythm, which makes me wonder if this could be part of the sun worship of the Winter Solstice Festival that we saw during Big Mom's flashback. Mars, however, sees through Bonnie's appearance and dismisses it as the result of her abilities and nothing more, which I'm sure many upset fans from last week found reassuring. As I said in the previous breakdown, Oda tends to create drawbacks and limitations for things that he introduces in his story that could be story breaking, and I strongly suspected that Bonnie's abilities would be another case of that. We see her revert to a regular childlike state, all tuckered out at the end of the chapter as well, as we anticipated from seeing her unable to hold her giant-like form for very long in previous chapters. Mars shoots out another beam-like attack at Luffy, who seems to have expanded his body like a balloon as a defensive measure. It's still unclear what exactly Mars's powers are here. It initially resembled some sort of electricity or lightning, but now appears to be much more flame-like. Whatever it is, it does seem to be somewhat effective against Luffy, as we've seen him take damage from non-lightning energy-based attacks in the past before, like with Kaido's Blast Breath, or even Kizaru's lasers from earlier in this arc. Realizing that simply doing damage to the elders isn't going to be enough to stop them, Luffy grabs Mars by his wings to prevent escape and orders the crew to help him send Mars flying. He seemingly pushes the elder into his elastic torso while the others apply pressure from his backside. Sanji debuts the Ifrit Jom version of his Hell Memories technique, and we first saw Hell Memories used by Sanji during his fight against Wadatsumi, where he seemingly engulfed himself in flame as a result of thinking about his time spent on Kamabaka before delivering a kick that resulted in the target being engulfed as well. We more recently saw it used against Queen, where his burning rage was instead sourced by his hatred for his family and their genetic modifications that he feared he had succumbed to. Also recall that Ifrit Jom was a stronger iteration of Sanji's Diable Jom, which utilized both armament haki as well as Germa's modifications, allowing Sanji to create a much more powerful, hotter, sparking blue flame. Notably, when accessing these modifications against Queen, Sanji's eyebrow flipped, and we've seen this happen a few times throughout the Egghead arc as well, such as when he used the Raw Heat Strike to intercept S-Shark, and when he dispersed Kizaru's laser with his leg. It seems to have flipped once again here as a result of using Ifrit Jom, though it reverts back not too long afterwards. Bonnie also gets in on the action with her Nika-like form and throws a giant rubbery punch. This should of course be no surprise since we have seen her use her abilities to mimic a future where her body was malleable like rubber before. It should be noted though that while she may be trying to imitate what she asked Luffy to show her earlier in this arc, she doesn't seem to have quite mimicked him exactly. Luffy's punches in Gear 5th have tended to involve him gradually enlarging his arm, as seen with the Star Gun and Dawn Gatling, the major exception being of course the Bajrang Gun. Bonnie's technique here much more resembles that sort of attack, much like Luffy's Elephant Gun or the attack we see later on in this chapter, where there's a specific point of expansion and the rest of the arm is the same width. Speaking of the Elephant Gun, it seems Bonnie has also imbued her fist with a bit of armament haki here as well. Of course, not to the full extent that Luffy was able to in his usage, but mostly just the tip of the expanded area. This is the first time that we've seen Bonnie use haki before, and while it's not clear that this is the result of her Nika-inspired form or some result of her own physical ability, I wouldn't be too surprised if it was the latter case. We've seen her be capable enough to take down grown men twice her size, and it's not like we haven't seen other forms of haki be used by children as well, such as with the 9-year-old Eyesight and Observation haki, or even a 10-year-old Ace having Conquerors. And after all, no matter how old she is, she's still a capable pirate captain, and supernova at that. In fact, Luffy calls out that their attacks are hurting him because they are imbued with haki, which may cause some people to speculate that Frankie has armament haki as well, but I think from what we can see, it's only Bonnie and Sanji here using it, as Bonnie's fist is coated with armament, and Sanji's Ifrit Jom inherently makes use of it as well. Frankie seems to just be using a stronger version of his strong right technique that we last saw used against Red King. Back then, I pointed out how Frankie didn't need haki to handle a Vice Admiral, and instead used his extending fist to break through Red King's mechanical arm, which he evidently failed to coat in armament haki. Frankie has always been plenty strong with his cyborg body alone, having always been able to land hits on Luffy. That said, there is a bit of an additional impact that we can see in some of these shots, indicating that there is something else going on. If it's not haki, I can also just see it being an additional impact or energy discharged as a result of the electricity involved when using this move, as seen when he debuted it with his new body for the first time during Punk Hazard. All of these techniques provide the necessary force to launch Mars away, as Luffy dubs this technique the Dawn Balloon. Now, he has used the Gear 5th version of Gum Gum Balloon before during his fight against Kaido, where it simply allowed himself to expand while inside Kaido's body, but this technique here is actually quite reminiscent of the one Gear 4th technique that was unique to Luffy's stuffed version of his Tankman form, the Gum Gum Cannonball. Both techniques involve trapping their target within Luffy's enlarged stomach by compressing his body, though here, the extra force is provided by his allies. It's this extra strength that sends Mars flying so far that he is no longer visible, whereas Cracker was only sent from the seducing woods to the Whole Cake Chateau with the cannonball technique. While Luffy believes this is enough to take Mars out of the picture, I wouldn't be surprised if the Elder returns relatively soon. After all, we've seen the Elders be relatively nimble and acrobatic, such as when Saturn reversed his trajectory after being thrown by Luffy, or when Warcury was able to launch himself into several flips before attacking the giants. One more thing to note is that once again, Luffy's hat is depicted as staying the same size when Luffy uses his giant form. I've talked about this on the channel before, as this is the one detail that Oda has kept consistent since the form's debut against Kaido, as well as throughout the arc against Kizaru and Saturn. There's gotta be something going on here, and I'm excited to see what Oda has planned. With Mars out of the way, the crew can now set sail and Luffy once again asks about Usopp, knowing that he'd love to see the giants up close once again. They express concern for the crew on the Labo phase, and so Atlas volunteers to check on them, which is a bit strange considering that they've been communicating via earpiece this whole time, but perhaps it's the result of Atlas being aware of York keeping tabs on their whereabouts. With the elders splitting up in the last chapter, we have Saturn unaccounted for in this one, and I've suspected he went up to assist Nostromo in taking out the Vegapunks. With Atlas now heading there, it feels like it may be making the jobs of the elders even easier. Though, they may have some trouble in their future, as the transmission transponder snail groggily wakes up and continues broadcasting the feed that's been playing while it was knocked out. It seems to be fine and well inside the Iron Giant, despite the robot being at what looks to be the bottom of the ocean. We also get a bit more on the interior of the Iron Giant, and while it's not too remarkable, it is very reminiscent of the designs that we've seen for regular labs in the series, whereas you'd think the technology within it would be a bit more esoteric considering its history. It all makes me wonder if Vegapunk didn't simply place the snail inside, but instead had been making more plans for inside of it, perhaps another lab altogether. Now, we had speculated that the message could continue on after cutting out some crucial lore that we can't have just yet as readers, and that seems to be the case here. Though, what we return with is a bit vague at best, with Vegapunk mentioning a will, presumably still talking about the people of the D. He hopes his message reaches them, but of course, in a cruel twist of fate, this important part has been cut off. With the message also comes more reaction shots from across the world, and we start with Whole Cake Island in what looks to be its capital, Sweet City. In the center, of course, is Katakuri, who we last saw during the Germa 66 cover story as he was trying to stop them from rescuing Caesar. To the right is the 32nd son, Charlotte Brownie, who we last saw in the cover story as well. Between him and Katakuri is what looks to be the 28th son and Minister of Seeds, Charlotte Kato, who was also alongside Brownie in that cover story. To the left is the 16th son and Minister of Gelato, Moscato, who was last seen at the very end of the Whole Cake Island arc. There are a few others that are a bit hard to make out. For example, this person with the pompadour could be the 15th son, Charlotte Noisette, the Minister of Finance, who we last saw as the cake on Whole Cake Island came tumbling down. Over here with a dark top hat could be the 18th son, Charlotte Lauren, who we last saw chasing the Straw Hats throughout the Sudetsu Woods. But there are a couple other pretty important inclusions here. In this panel speaking is the 11th son, Charlotte Zukoto, the Minister of Alcohol, who was apparently with Big Mom when the crew invaded Wano, though it's a bit hard to tell. There are also a few others present in this chapter who were part of that group, including the 31st son, Charlotte Mobile, who was the Minister of Tasting, as well as the 9th daughter, Charlotte Broye, who was the Minister of Meringue. We saw her with them as the crew discussed Big Mom's status after she fell into the sea. The inclusion of these characters tells us that the Big Mom pirates who were in Wano have now made it back to Toto Land since the aftermath of the raid. Up until this point, it's been unknown what happened to them after encountering Cypher Pole. We did see Smoothie and Mondor, who were both with that group just a few chapters ago, but it wasn't clear just exactly where they were during that scene. It's still unclear if either Big Mom or Perospero were rescued after their defeats on Onigashima, so command of the Big Mom pirates may have now fallen to Katakuri as Daifuku wanted. We'll have to see what this crew does next. Perhaps they'll want retaliation against the Blackbeard pirates for taking Pudding, and many have speculated that the Blackbeard pirates would be going to Wano to claim the Pluton after Caribou reveals the information to Teach, so maybe we'll get to see the two crews clash there, perhaps even allowing the opportunity for the return of Big Mom in some capacity. Anyways, of course, we see Vivi and Morgans tuned in once again, and they probably have been the ones we've seen the most consistently throughout the message, really reinforcing their importance in wherever the story is going. We also get a fun cameo from Gaimon alongside Sarfunkel. We last saw these two during the Decks of the World cover story, where she was introduced. Around them, we also see the Rabbit Snake and Rooster Fox on the Island of Rare Animals as well. Now back over on the northeast coast, it seems Jupiter and Warcury have made it to the scene as we get a ton of Cypher Pole agents and the Seraphim falling out of the sky. Recall that this group fell out of the Labo phase after Nostromo cut the basement and crashed down onto the Fabrio phase, at which point Jupiter had sucked all of them into himself. It wasn't really clear what his goal was with this, but from this chapter, it seems he was doing so to save them, as he's seen releasing them out onto marine ships surrounding the island. Down here looks to be the bubble that S-Snake is in, but it's truly a miracle that the rest of the Cypher Pole agents are still alive after having been through all of that. I also wonder where the rest of the Seraphim will end up. It would be pretty interesting if S-Bear lands on the ship with Bonnie and Kuma. Jupiter then resumes inhaling in order to pull the giant's ship back toward the island, but is stopped by a fist from Luffy. While the Marines are terrified at the scene at hand, the giants cheer, and among them being Oimo alongside the giant that helped carry Bonnie, Frankie, Atlas, and Kuma back to the ship. It's good to see that he's fine and alive after having been cut down by Nostromo a few chapters ago. While Luffy is occupied with Jupiter though, Warcury runs ahead and charges at the ship, and it appears that he's approximately as big as the ship itself here. This is kind of interesting as he didn't seem that big relative to the giants earlier in this arc, but of course proportions, perspective, and scaling are not always consistent in One Piece. I've also seen speculation as to why Warcury would be so willing to jump above the ocean like this, with some saying this is confirmation that the elders do not have devil fruit powers, since they would be weak to the ocean if so. I still don't think we can say anything conclusively just yet. As we've seen with Saturn, they seem to have enough skill that they can manipulate their bodies and momentum to avoid making contact with the ocean, and as I mentioned earlier, Warcury is quite acrobatic as well. This is somewhat reminiscent of Aramaki's words, where you would expect such powerful people to have countermeasures against their obvious weaknesses. Speaking of, we may have gotten our first look at their potential weakness with this chapter's ending, as the Iron Giant rises from the depths of the ocean and lands a clean strike right to Warcury's cheek, breaking his tusk in the process. For several months now, some fans have been speculating that the Iron Giant would have the capacity to do damage to the Elders, and while that's certainly possible, it's yet to be seen as the Elders have taken damage before only to regenerate their bodies. It wouldn't be surprising to me at all if the tusk returns in the very next chapter. Though, then there's the issue of Luffy not being able to affect Warcury whatsoever with his techniques. This could be attributed to the Iron Giant being that much more capable against the Elders, or perhaps the Giant was able to make contact with the weak point of Warcury's tough skin. So far, Luffy has only ever tried hitting him from atop the head and from the nose, so perhaps this tusk area is where Warcury is most susceptible. We've also seen Dory and Brogy able to defend against Warcury's tusks and even knock him back, so maybe there's something there. Regardless, perhaps the biggest part of this chapter is what looks to be a conversation between Joy Boy and the Iron Giant itself, whose name may be Emet. Emet is of course a biblical word that can mean truth, and in Jewish folklore, it's the word written on golems to bring them to life. Once again, really playing into the symbolism found in our real-world cultures and religions. It appears Emet was prompted by Joy Boy's reminder to act at the right time, which seems to be in this instance here with the Elders attacking these giants. There are of course a ton of mysteries revolving around this that I'm excited to get more answers on, but I love how the chapter ends off with the giants astonished at the robot's arrival, and Luffy enthralled with how cool this giant robo is, much like he was when he saw the General Frankie for the first time. Recall just earlier in the arc, Luffy and Chopper were trying their best at activating the robot using code words, so it's going to be a lot of fun seeing Emet interact with Luffy going forward. One last fun detail is that the way Emet punches Warcury is quite similar to how Luffy punched Jupiter, with a simple fist extending laterally to the right. Perhaps we could be seeing a situation where Luffy's movements are what controls the robot as well. We'll just have to see. And that's about it for everything I wanted to talk about in this chapter. Let me know in the comments which part you enjoyed the most and what you're looking forward to in the next one, which will be 2 weeks away. As always, if you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.